Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, after days of negative headlines for the internet giant, Facebook's founder Mark Zuckerberg has broken his silence over the Cambridge Analytica story and whether users' personal data was exploited in political campaigns.
This isn't rocket science, right? I mean, there's a lot of hard work that we need to do to make it harder for nation states like Russia to do election interference, to make it so that trolls and other folks can't spread fake news. But we can get in front of this. And we have a responsibility to do this, not only for the 2018 midterms in the US, which are going to be a huge deal this year, and that's just a huge focus of us, but there's a big election in India this year, there's a big election in Brazil, there are big elections around the world.
Mark Zuckerberg, and our point woman on this story, the BBC's technology reporter Zoe Kleinman, joins us now from Southampton. Zoe, does the apology go far enough?
A lot of people don't think it does. When he first put his Facebook post up last night, everyone was sort of saying, well, you know, you don't sound particularly sorry at all. He sort of said, yes, it's my responsibility, and yes, I created the platform, and, you know, I'm sorry if something's gone wrong. But he wasn't particularly forthcoming or emotional about it. Right.
What about, though, the points on regulation? He did seem to accept that regulation, whatever form it takes, was necessary.
Facebook has hit this situation now where it's got much bigger than I think it ever expected to be, and it's got to accept that it's a publisher, it's publishing content, and that makes it very powerful, but it also makes it subject to very strict regulation, just like other communications channels. And I think he recognises that it's time, and also I think he wants the regulation in place to avoid these sort of situations where we're going back in time, looking at something that's happened historically and trying to fix it, you know, in real time after the event, whereas if regulation was there, it would be much clearer from now on what Facebook cannot and cannot do with people's data. But of course that might also end up biting them in the wallet, because it might restrict the advertising opportunities that the firm is currently able to offer.
Right. Do you think it will mean a change to their business model?
Not straight away, no, I don't. I mean, I think Facebook is a free product, and if you are using that product for free, then that means you are the product and your data has that value. What I think it's going to have to do is to really hammer that home. You know, it's been hidden in the T's and C's for years, but people haven't really realised it. It's also, I think, going to have to be much more relaxed about letting people opt out of how their data is used, and that is possibly going to lead to it becoming a slightly smaller platform in terms of it being attractive for advertisers.
I mean, the hashtag delete Facebook, has that garnered much support? I mean, I haven't deleted my Facebook account, it has to be said.
Do you know, that's an interesting thing. So many people have seen it and then said, yeah, but I haven't done it. So we haven't really seen that massive footfall. I think it had about 10,000 retweets within the first couple of hours, which is quite a lot. Yes. But we certainly haven't seen that footfall in the millions.
Right, but you may see people like me looking at the terms and conditions and perhaps resetting what you put on your Facebook account.
Yeah, and one of the things Mark Zuckerberg has said is that that's going to become a much more obvious tab at the top of the newsfeed shortly, I imagine. So you'll probably see a reminder to go in and have a look. The other thing you can do, of course, it's very easy to do. If you go into the general settings, you can download a copy of the data that Facebook has on you, and you can have a look and see exactly what it's been keeping. That might include the contacts in your phone book, it might include all of your private messages, whatever you've given it access to over the years will all be there, and you can see for yourself what it has.
Gulp. Zoe, thank you very much for joining us. What's this done, do you think, in terms of democracy? Has our democracy been compromised by this, Trevor?
Personally, I don't think so. I mean, you know, politicians of all stamps have used the latest methods to try and persuade people, to try and frame issues in a particular way. I don't myself think that's the big issue here. I think Mark Zuckerberg, not personally worried, I mean, frankly, he's only down to his last $68 billion this week. Yeah. But I think what he's more worried about is that big tech starts to look like the big banks did 7 or 8 years ago. And two things then happen. Facebook is not going to get deleted.
No, a British group of advertisers, of course, have, you know, threatened to stop using the platform. Do you think that's just virtue signalling?
I think it's virtue signalling. I don't think most people are going to do exactly what you did, look at it and go, well, why bother? I think what he is more worried about is this, that if there's a mood for greater public regulation, what they'll do is bound up the lawmakers on surface regulations. What I think Facebook would be really worried about is if law changed to put the value of that data in the consumer's hands.
Yeah, but isn't that what could happen? You know, that we would be in charge of who we allow to see our data?
It's conceivable, but I think what Facebook will do tactically is to find ways of heading that off at the pass, because that would really change things dramatically if we had the value. In the way we do with our store cards, you get advantages. Loyalty card.
Yeah.
If Facebook were in that situation, they would have to change their business model completely. And that's why I think you've got this announcement yesterday.
Just to return to the issue of politics and democracy, Cambridge Analytica and the story that has been exposed this week. How difficult is it for governments who may have used their services in terms of political campaigns and digging dirt on opponents?
Look, my view about this is that the genie's out of the bottle. And frankly, there's a lot of focus on Cambridge Analytica, and they clearly, in my view, have done something at least unethical, if not unlawful, in the way this data has been used. But the truth of the matter is, nobody objected to it when Blue State Digital did something rather similar for the Obama campaign. The point is, we now have these new tools, and one of the difficulties we have in politics is that lawmakers are really totally ill-equipped to deal with this. Most members of Parliament, and by the way, Congress, don't really understand it. I looked up this morning, there are fewer than 30 members of Parliament out of 650 who have a science background. I mean, one of the big problems here is the political sphere doesn't really understand it, and the lawyers who dominate Parliament think that the way you'll solve this is to pass a law. They will get hammered.
All right, all those lawyers in the House of Commons.
A request for a warrant to search Cambridge Analytica's databases has been postponed by a High Court judge. The Information Commissioner's office says it'll continue to pursue the warrant in order to push forward its investigation into the firm. Well, earlier the Culture Secretary was asked whether the Information Commissioner lacks sufficient powers to respond to allegations of data misuse.
The Data Protection Bill, currently before Parliament, is all about strengthening this enforcement and strengthening people's consent. And the powers that we were left, frankly, I wasn't going to get partisan, but the powers that we were left by the party opposite are the powers that are being used at the moment, and I want those powers strengthened. Now, if following this, the evidence from this investigation, we need to further strengthen those powers, then I'm willing to consider that.
More about this in a moment, but first let's just quickly take you across to Brussels. Theresa May is arriving. She's arriving for this summit with EU leaders. It's a two-day summit. She's just going to be there today for us, but we've seen a number of other leaders arriving in the last few minutes. And she has just arrived with her team. Now, Cambridge Analytica is accused of using this information from 50 million Facebook profiles to help Donald Trump's election campaign. Last night, its founder, Mark Zuckerberg, said his company shouldn't have relied on the company's assurances that the data was destroyed in 2015. Well, we've conducted a Sky data poll to assess the impact of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. We asked whether people trust Facebook more or less now than last week. 65% of those surveyed said that they now trust Facebook less, with 31% saying there's been no change and 4% saying they now trust Facebook more. We also asked whether people understood what Facebook does with their data, and the results were clear-cut. 80% of people said they don't understand, leaving 20% who say they do. So how damaging has this episode been for Facebook's brand? I'm joined now by branding expert Rita Clifton. Rita, how damaging is this for Facebook? We've seen that the share value tumble in the last couple of days, but can they come back again just as easily?
Yes, I mean, Facebook is one of the world's most valuable brands. It can certainly come back. But of course, the reason why it's valuable is because it obviously makes use of its users' information, and because it has a very strong emotional affinity with its users. Now, that's the thing that has been damaged. And of course, they need to rethink the business that they have. I have to say, though, that I think that Mark Zuckerberg has gone some way to reassure people. And frankly, that's very necessary. This is a brand that is no longer an adolescence. It's a big, mature business, and they need to start behaving like that.
Do you think he should have spoken sooner? Because there's been a couple of days of radio silence from him, hasn't there, really? And yes, he has sort of done a mea culpa on American television now, but could it have made things better if he'd appeared sooner?
Yes, I mean, there are 3 golden rules when you have this sort of crisis in any business or any brand. You've got to fess up, you've got to pay up, and you've got to speak up. He's done some of the fessing, and he's admitted they've made mistakes. He's talked quite extensively about what they need to do to repair, some of the things that have been issues and that maybe have destroyed some trust. And now he's speaking up. You could always speak earlier. There are many instances of brands that have gone through these kind of crises where it's taken a while for the chief executive or the business leader to get in front of the cameras. Sometimes that's because there have been legal issues. Sometimes, frankly, they just had to work out what's going on. This is a complicated case here. And so, therefore, it's been right to get it right, because if you don't get this right, this is one of the world's most valuable brands, and that will really hurt them if they're not careful, if they don't do this correctly.
So how do they build back up again and regain that trust?
Well, they actually have, they have millions of users. And at the moment, they're not as transparent as I think they might be about how the information that they collect is going to be used. So that kind of openness and transparency is becoming critical now in corporate behaviour, and indeed in any trusted brand. So if in the past their purpose has been about being open and connected, that's how they need to behave themselves. They need to be open about how they are collecting information, what sort of information, how it's going to be used. And that's the first step. Certainly quite a big step, I think, that the company has taken so far. They need to go a lot further, because if they start leaking users, delete Facebook is not a very attractive hashtag to have when you're this kind of brand. But, Uber went through a delete Uber, and they're still alive and kicking as a business. So it is recoverable. They just need to make sure they keep on the right track.
It's different to, as you say, it's something that people have an emotional connection with, isn't it? And when something is an intrinsic part of your life, it's very different from going and buying another washing powder or another car if you lose faith in the brand, isn't it?
Well, that's true. And of course, these big new paradigm global brands and businesses like, Google's and Amazon and so on, they were built on the back of a digital world. And that means you can move incredibly quickly and quickly as well, unless you look after it properly. But so many Facebook users, as indeed many of the social media sites, that it's very stitched into their lives. And Facebook has got a very loyal following. But it's a very competitive world out there, a very competitive market. There is always a new entrant coming and snapping at your heels. And so Facebook has got a lot of competition. It's got to make sure it grows up as a business. It really understands its users, its connections and so on, and really, really step the business up so it deserves the trust that people place in it.
OK, Rita Clifton, branding expert, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's go more now on the investigation into the data firm Cambridge Analytica, which is alleged to have illegally harvested the data of 50 million Facebook profiles. Well,
last night, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg said his company should not have relied on Cambridge Analytica's assurances that the data had been deleted. He told users that Facebook would learn from this experience.
Well, let's speak to Silky Carlo, the director of Big Brother Watch. Very good afternoon to you, Silky. How big is the issue of harvesting data, would you say?
It's a huge issue that clearly has the power not only to intrude into the lives of private individuals, but also to potentially reshape democracies. And that's what we've seen with this most recent expose. But it really is just a drop in the ocean. Cambridge Analytica was allegedly processing 50 million profiles on Facebook, but Facebook itself has 2.2 billion profiles. That's almost a third of the people on Earth. And their own processing powers and their own potential to influence and manipulate their users are really, really quite extraordinary.
But we still don't know really how much this harvesting the data really affected people's decision when they went to the polls.
That's true, and I think it would be really difficult to ever really fully quantify and to measure the effect that this kind of micro-targeting had. And I imagine actually that a lot of Cambridge Analytica's public spiel has been just that. You know, it may not have actually been that effective. So certainly I'm not worried about you know, that they tipped an election, but clearly this is influencing and affecting the way that people ingest news. It's becoming increasingly difficult for people to know whether the things that they're reading are true, objective, or whether they are targeted specifically for them. And as I say, that's a risk with groups like Cambridge Analytica, but it's really a risk with groups like Facebook too, because Facebook has so much greater power than any of these small groups like Cambridge Analytica. And we've seen in the past that Facebook has, for example, experimented with manipulating users' news feeds to change their emotions, to see if it can make people feel happy or sad. So what are we going to do when Facebook starts using this kind of influencing on its own platform towards its own political and commercial ends? It would be very difficult for us to detect that too.
Facebook have said that they have made mistakes. It's what Mark Zuckerberg has said, and he said that he will address the concern of their users. But I guess you can't completely turn your back away from targeted advertising, because, say, for example, I'm a Liverpool fan and I want to buy a Liverpool ticket online. I'd rather have adverts about Liverpool club, the club that I support, rather than Spurs.
Sure, so maybe there's some convenience in some kind of targeted advertising, but that really takes a different kind of shape when Facebook is evaluating your sexuality or advertising to you pregnancy test, or, you know, trying to work out a kind of totality of your personality, your greatest hopes, your deepest fears, your family relationships, and so on. And then potentially, as we've seen in this case, that data being made available to other groups as well. So it really is, you know, quite a serious issue. And you're absolutely right, the ad model isn't going away. And although Zuckerberg said that he made mistakes, you know, that mistake, which is, you know, the fact that this is a commercial platform that is data-driven, is really inherent to Facebook's business model. And as he said, that ad model is not going away.
How severe do you think this backlash will be?
Well, $50 billion is a lot of money to lose. And so, you know, we've seen a financial impact already. More importantly, I hope that, you know, I have limited expectations of what social media companies can do about this. I hope they do something, but more importantly, I hope that individual users really think twice about the risks that are involved with giving away lots of information, either intentionally or unintentionally on these platforms, and, you know, think twice about whether you want to A, be on them, but B, whether you want to put such personal information and, you know, things like photos of your children and so on these platforms.
Where do you think the majority of the responsibility should lie? Because it's not just Facebook here. If you go and apply for a credit card, for example, your information's out there. Somebody has your data.
That's true. So, you know, we are in an age of data exploitation, put quite simply. So I think on all sides, you know, there is responsibility on all sides, from the regulators, from lawmakers, from the companies themselves. But, you know, as we've seen with such popular free services, it partly falls down on the user as well, you know, unfortunately, and I totally accept that it's a burden, and there are some difficult choices to make. But, you know, if we want to protect our privacy and society at large and democratic norms, then we do have to make some tough decisions.
Silky, many thanks indeed.
The Information Commissioner's request for a warrant to search Cambridge Analytica's servers has been postponed. The data firm is accused of illegally harvesting information from 50 million Facebook profiles. Today, Israel and Germany joined the list of countries with questions for Facebook over possible privacy infringements. Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg has now admitted the social network made mistakes. But why did it take so long for him to come forward? Well, let's take a look through the story so far. Well, on March the 16th, the social network giant was told the New York Times and the Guardian's Observer would release damning reports of a data leak. In response, Facebook released a blog post saying it was suspending Cambridge Analytica from its site, but that the claims that this was a data breach were false. On March the 17th, the newspapers ran the story. The next day, Damien Collins, the chairman of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee, accused Facebook of knowing about the breach but failing to act and called on the social network's boss, Mark Zuckerberg, to appear before Parliament. Meanwhile, in the States, New York and Massachusetts attorney generals launched an investigation into how users' data was used. Number 10 weighed in, with the Prime Minister backing inquiries into the data breach. In the midst of this backlash, Facebook's Chief Information Security Officer, Alex Stamos, was reported to have left the company over an internal conflict. By March the 19th, Channel 4 were airing an undercover video claiming the data firm played a decisive role in Trump's 2016 election victory. The pressure mounts on both sides of the Atlantic for Facebook's boss to appear in front of MPs, but Zuckerberg remains silent. On March the 21st, 5 days in, Zuckerberg finally breaks his silence, admitting his company made mistakes, saying he's open to regulations being imposed on the site. So why was Facebook's chief executive silent for so long? Joining me now is one of the UK's leading public relations and crisis management experts, Kevin Craig. Hello to you, Kevin Craig. So we have finally heard from Mark Zuckerberg. Has he done enough?
He hasn't done enough yet. He will know that. It's very uncharacteristic, the bad way that this has been handled since this crisis emerged. And what is good is that he finally has come out. He's the brand of Facebook. He personifies it. He is one of the most gifted entrepreneurs of his generation. But so far, the lack of forward thinking in this crisis is very untypical of his business. And what still hasn't happened is he hasn't got ahead of the story. And the commitments he's made in this latest announcement, they're not strong enough, because until he says something that gives clarity that the business can say today that no more apps like this are being used until they can guarantee data is safe, until he comes out and says that data rights have been revoked until they know it can't happen again, he's in real trouble. And what's made harder for him now is that the cat-handed manner that the way the organisation Facebook has handled this to date has whetted the appetite and increased the desire amongst politicians in particular to have their pound of flesh and get him in front of their committees. And I don't blame Damien Collins and others to be furious about their time effectively being wasted. And now I think it's going to take Zuckerberg himself to come out to try and calm this down. I would like to say, let's put it in context. 50 million people we think were affected by this. So far, 1.7 million people have retweeted delete Facebook. So users at the end of the day are still staying loyal. And we have to keep it in context. But what he does in the next days and next fortnight is going to be pivotal.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that delete Facebook hashtag. There's also the boycott Facebook hashtag, gaining some momentum, but as you have said, put it into context. But what about the advertisers hitting the bottom line of Facebook? How powerful is their action?
Their action is hugely powerful, and ISBA, the trade body in the UK, which I've advised in the past, when they're angry about something, you know about it. And they have a lot of money invested in trust. Trust is what Facebook and Zuckerberg himself have talked a lot about this week. And they are being brought into this, and they spend a huge amount of money with this business. And they are going to want the answers to the sorts of questions that I've just articulated. They're going to want to see Facebook ahead of the story, and they're going to want to know that they can trust this business that they spend huge amounts of advertising with. It's only if they cannot get those reassurances and answers will you see the potential of any longer-term impact on the share price, because what always happens is, especially in global corporates like this, a crisis will damage the share price in the first couple of weeks. It will bounce back up, but the advertising lobby are upset and very powerful, so Facebook really need to focus on that.
Yeah, and you talked about the share price, 40 billion wiped off Facebook's share price, and you also talked about trust in terms of advertisers. But what about trust in terms of Facebook's users? Once that is gone, can it be regained?
It would be very easy for a crisis management and PR person like myself to exaggerate at this point the degree to which the ordinary user, man or woman across the world, is making decisions based on this crisis. They're not yet there yet. Zuckerberg and Facebook have a chance to undo some of the damage by getting ahead of the story, by coming out with commitments much stronger than those in the last 48 hours. If they do that effectively, the impact on the people who use and love Facebook, because it has just become so inherently linked to everyday life for billions across the world, and it can still be salvaged.
And in terms of salvaging it, does that take Mark Zuckerberg appearing before Congress, but also appearing before MPs here? And do you think that's likely?
I think it's much more likely now than it was, because previously, because Facebook is so multi-jurisdictional, i.e. operates across the world, the idea of him having to appear, if called, in any one of so many nation states was highly unlikely. He'd have senior management to do that. But now, the way the problem is escalated, I think him appearing in person, which he's open to, is much, much more likely, especially in this country when you think that our legislators have effectively been misled, which MPs don't take kindly to.
OK. Kevin Craig, thanks very much indeed for talking. Alexander Nix, the suspended chief executive of Cambridge Analytica, has been recalled to give evidence to MPs who cite inconsistencies in answers he gave last month. The data firm is accused of illegally harvesting information from 50 million Facebook profiles. Earlier, a request for a warrant to search Cambridge Analytica's databases was postponed. And in the Commons, the Culture Secretary was asked whether the Information Commissioner lacks sufficient powers to respond to allegations of data misuse.
The data protection bill currently before Parliament is all about strengthening this enforcement and strengthening people's consent. And the powers that we were left, frankly, I wasn't going to get partisan, but the powers that we were left by the party opposite are the powers that are being used at the moment, and I want those powers strengthened. Now, if following this, the evidence from this investigation, we need to further strengthen those powers, then I'm willing to consider that.
Well, last night, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg admitted mistakes had been made in its handling of data and said he's open to regulations being imposed on his site. Let's speak to Sky's Adele Robinson. She's in Palo Alto in California, where Facebook has its headquarters. It was a long-awaited intervention from Mark Zuckerberg. Has it done enough, Adele?
Well, we shall see. There's still quite a lot of criticism internationally about Mark Zuckerberg and indeed Facebook. We've now seen Israel and Germany launch their own investigations into how their privacy laws may have been breached and how Facebook users in their country, how their data may have been misused. And I think we can expect more countries to follow suit. Mark Zuckerberg did finally come out and apologise last night, but his critics say he only apologised for the situation. He didn't apologise for Facebook's actions. He did say that he was open to testifying before Congress, but there was a caveat. He said that if that was the right thing to do, if he was the right person. He also indicated that he would be Facebook would be open to regulation, but he also indicated that perhaps that would be over a pending political ad bill, with his critics again stating, well, what about wider measures? Presumably any wider measures would impact Facebook's bottom line. So there are still many unanswered questions from Mark Zuckerberg. Many of them, some people believe that he dodged in his television interview last night, namely why Facebook didn't notify Facebook users of the Cambridge Analytica issue at the time, a couple of years ago, how much control Facebook will be given to users over its privacy, how far will they go? Also, clarity over the current situation, over how safe Facebook is, and also how many other Cambridge Analytica type situations are ongoing. Zuckerberg didn't seem to know. So there's a sense that perhaps he's been buying time over this. He's spent 5-6 days preparing to release a public statement and to do his interviews, and he says that he's going to be announcing changes going forward. He says that he will fix this, and of course he needs to fix this for the future of Facebook. In the background, though, we have these continuing investigations here in the US, in the EU and the UK. UK, and it's reported that the Federal Trade Commission is now probing into whether Facebook violated its consent, an agreement that they came to in 2011. If that's the case, they have the potential, the capacity to fine Facebook millions of pounds. So it remains to be seen what happens now. We know that Mark Zuckerberg is expected to address employees here at HQ tomorrow night. I think we can expect more announcements and more measures being announced by Facebook in the coming days, though. But the pressure certainly isn't decreasing, that's for sure.
Adele Robinson, thank you. The founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, has apologised after data from 50 million subscribers was used by the British company Cambridge Analytica. Speaking publicly for the first time since allegations surfaced that data was misused during the US presidential election, he acknowledged there's been a major breach of trust. Well, our media editor Am Incorrigible is here with me. So, Mark Zuckerberg has apologised, but did he go far enough?
Well, Fiona, Mark Zuckerberg's comments certainly stem the bleeding, but I think these wounds, or this wound, runs pretty deep. And we have developments every single hour which suggest there are new and big challenges for the company. Lawmakers on both sides of the Atlantic are still demanding that he testify personally. We have investors who are suing the company over their misuse of data. And just this evening, Mozilla, the brand behind the Firefox web browser, has become the first leading brand to say that it's going to pause advertising with Facebook. I've spoken in the last hour to a leading figure in UK advertising. He says his clients are looking very carefully as to whether or not they should do the same. Facebook is a company that made $40.7 billion last year, almost all of it in digital advertising. So if the trickle that we're seeing tonight turns into a flood, then the business model that made Facebook so rich so quickly could just as quickly go into reverse.
Amal, thank you.
The Facebook founder, Mark Zuckerberg, has publicly apologised after the personal data from more than 50 million accounts was misused. Speaking for the first time over the scandal involving British company Cambridge Analytica, he admitted that there had been a breach of trust. And as Martin Geisler reports from Silicon Valley in California, there were promises too of major changes.
Dark clouds over Facebook's San Francisco headquarters today, and a storm growing inside too. The company's chief executive has more power than most prime ministers or presidents, so this humbling apology can't have been easy.
So this was a major breach of trust, and I'm really sorry that this happened. We have a basic responsibility to protect people's data, and if we can't do that, then we don't deserve to have the opportunity to serve people.
Mark Zuckerberg has grown the Facebook empire and a $70 billion fortune in just 14 years. But he'll struggle to buy back much of the trust this scandal has cost him. 50 million Facebook users had their personal data harvested by Cambridge Analytica. The details said to have been used to influence elections and political campaigns. Now, says Zuckerberg, a massive drive to ensure it can't happen again.
This isn't rocket science. Right? I mean, there's a lot of hard work that we need to do to make it harder for nation states like Russia to do election interference, to make it so that trolls and other folks can't spread fake news. But we can get in front of this.
Thousands of apps will be checked, reviewed, and policies tightened, he says. But behind the apologies and the promises, there is a reality here. Social media doesn't come for free. We pay for it by allowing these organisations to learn about us, profile us, and help advertisers to target us. Quietly here in Silicon Valley, many executives are thought to be wondering, what did you expect? Inside Facebook's headquarters, they are hard at work rebuilding a damaged reputation. Note the address, incidentally. One Hacker Way. The company chose it themselves. It won't seem so funny now. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Silicon Valley, San Francisco.
Facebook's billionaire founder and chief executive Mark Zuckerberg has finally found the words to address publicly the data scandal that has spooked the markets and shaken users' trust in his previously all-powerful platform. Last weekend, Channel 4 News, as well as The Observer and New York Times, revealed how the data analytics company Cambridge Analytica harvested tens of millions of its online profiles unknown to users. We also broadcast undercover footage in which CA executives boasted of dirty tricks, bribery and entrapment, and the company's role in the campaign to put Donald Trump in the White House. Mark Zuckerberg has now apologised for Facebook's role in the data leaks scandal and said he would step up to fix what he admitted was a violation of trust. But is it too little, too late?
So this was a major breach of trust, and I'm really sorry that this happened.
Finally, a mea culpa directed at Facebook's 2 billion users worldwide.
You know, we have a basic responsibility to protect people's data, and if we can't do that, then we don't deserve to have the opportunity to serve people. So our responsibility now is to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And
after days of silence, the elusive Mark Zuckerberg came blinking into the light to explain how the social media giant had messed things up. Well, how someone else had messed things up for them, and how bad that is for everyone.
You know, as uncomfortable as it is for me to do, you know, a TV interview, it's I think that this is an important thing.
The story that forced the CEO onto television is this one. The former research director of Cambridge Analytica, Christopher Wiley, last week told us how the data company had drawn on as many as 50 million Facebook profiles via the work of Cambridge academic Alexander Kogan.
We were able to get upwards of 50 million plus Facebook records in the span of a couple months.
50 million?
Yeah, over 50 million records from Facebook using this method.
And how many of those people behind those profiles were aware that their profiles had been used in this way?
Almost none.
Facebook says it first learned in 2015 that Alexander Kogan had violated its policies by passing that data to Cambridge Analytica, but was satisfied with signed statements from all concerned that the data was deleted.
I think that this was clearly a mistake in retrospect.
Was it putting too much trust in developers?
I mean, I think it did. And that's why, you know, we need to make sure that we don't make that mistake ever again.
In an effort to rebuild trust, the Facebook CEO says they'll be alerting users whose data might have been compromised, all 50 million or more.
And going forward, when we identify apps that are similarly doing sketchy things, we're going to make sure that we tell people then too. Right? That's definitely something that, you know, looking back on this, you know, I regret that we didn't do at the time. And I think we got that wrong.
It felt a more innocent time back in 2012 when the whiz kid of Silicon Valley listed his fledgling company on the stock exchange and Wall Street loved him. But there was no immediate bounce for Facebook shares after the Zuckerberg statement last night. They've fallen over 2 of the last 3 days, wiping nearly $50 billion off the company's market value. Other tech stocks have suffered too, investors fearful of tighter scrutiny of all major online platforms. Does a reckoning over regulation follow?
I actually am not sure we shouldn't be regulated. I actually think the question is more, what is the right regulation, rather than yes or no, should it be regulated?
Those who make America's laws on Capitol Hill sound mad as hell with the tech titan. Next time he's in DC, it won't be for a red carpet appearance among the great and good at the White House. They want him to face tough questions before a Senate committee, although he doesn't sound overly keen.
So what we try to do is send the person at Facebook who will have the most knowledge about what Congress is trying to learn. So if that's me, then I am happy to go.
You are the right person. You should come before the committee. There's no question about it. We hope you do it voluntarily. But I think there has to be a subpoena for all of the documents. It's standard operating procedure. It ought to apply to Mark Zuckerberg and the tech world. He's not above the law.
Also not above the law, Cambridge Analytica. Senators have questions for it as well over the role it played in the election of Donald Trump and its harvesting of Facebook profiles.
I have just seen a British investigative Channel 4 tape on this, and it's amazing. I don't think, in my almost 25 years here, I have been more concerned by something than I have by Cambridge Analytica.
Finally today, a tweet from the president. Remember, he writes, when they were saying Donald Trump was giving great speeches but not using social media as well as Hillary Clinton? Well, he brags, not saying that anymore. A cryptic reference apparently celebrating the digital campaign that was built in part by the now disgraced Cambridge Analytica, a view that contrasts markedly with his own team, who say they won't use the company again as the president campaigns for re-election in 2020. In Brazil, prosecutors have opened an investigation there to determine whether Cambridge Analytica broke data rules by using Facebook profiles before that country's elections last October. And in New York today, there was another mea culpa moment from a Facebook boss. Their head of news partnerships was talking about fake news, but started by addressing the very real crisis of trust in the platform itself. Porrick O'Brien was there and joins us now from New York.
Kylie, welcome to a very snowy Central Park. The reason we're here, though, as you say, around the corner from here, a Financial Times organised conference called The Future of News, or, as one journalist dubbed it, the second instalment in Facebook's apology tour. The reason for that, a woman called Campbell Brown, their head of news, was talking about the scandal and the controversy that Facebook find themselves in the middle of. Here is a flavour of what she had to say.
How have things been in the last few days?
Yeah. Look, it's been a rough week. It's frankly been a rough year. This breach of trust that's happened, as Mark described it last night, it doesn't feel good for anyone. We have, I think, as a tech company, been too focused on the positive and not nearly vigilant enough about the negative. And we've been caught flat-footed. And there is, an awakening that's taking place inside the company where the mentality is very much all hands on deck in terms of trying to address this. But people have to see how we perform on our promises.
Now, of course, the problem with that awakening is that, as Kylie pointed out in her piece, this has been on Facebook's radar for about 2 years now. And also remember that as this story was about to break at the weekend, Facebook got lawyers involved to try to shut it down. Now, in fairness to Campbell Brown, she said that was a mistake in her talk here this morning. The big headline act, though, is coming in about an hour's time. None other than Steve Bannon will speak at the conference, ex-chief strategist for Trump and, of course, most importantly, vice president and secretary of Cambridge Analytica for a while. The big question, did he know how Cambridge Analytica was getting that information? What will he say? Will he answer that question? Watch this space.
Porrick, thanks. Porrick O'Brien in New York.
On Tuesday, the board of Cambridge Analytica announced it was suspending Chief Executive Alexander Nix. Now, more facts have emerged about other companies linked to the London-based political strategy firm. Our reporter Andy Davis has the latest.
Once again, the Cambridge Analytica offices in London were the centre of some attention today. The building was evacuated after a suspicious package was identified, but it turned out to be a false alarm. Tomorrow it could be the information commissioners, investigators going in, if they finally get their warrant. It's been one dramatic event after another for Cambridge Analytica. As for their parent company, SCL, which has had several government contracts, finally today came a comment on a claim made yesterday in the Times. It was alleged that Cambridge Analytica's parent company, SCL, had been behind this apparent sting in St Kitts and Nevis in 2010. The footage of a politician being offered a bribe was set up and released, it was claimed, by SCL in order to undermine the politician's electoral chances. The politician later said he was aware of what was going on. Today we tracked down one of SCL's directors, the company founder Nigel Oakes. He told Channel 4 News he ran their defence section and had no connection to SCL's political work. But he had this to say about alleged entrapment.
I can categorically say I have never been aware of anything remotely concerning entrapment. As far as I'm aware, it would never have happened in any of the operating companies in the group.
Nigel Oakes was also able to shed some light today on an emerging development in the company's structure, involving a new company called Emma Data, established last August. Its address listed at Canary Wharf in London. Among its directors, Alexander Nix from Cambridge Analytica and parent company SCL, Julian Wheatland from SCL, and as of last week, Jennifer and Rebecca Mercer, daughters of the billionaire Republican funder Robert Mercer. Nigel Oakes has now told Channel 4 News that it's his understanding that this was set up a year ago to acquire all of Cambridge Analytica and all of SCL. We know little else about the deal. The SCL press office, once again, did not respond to our inquiries.
Andy Davis joins us now. Andy, what do you make of all this?
Difficult to tell, John, because this company was set up last year, and maybe it is an attempt just to simplify the structures. Maybe it is also a coincidence that the Mercers, such influential figures in Republican circles, were named as directors just a few days after we, and no doubt the Observer, notified Cambridge Analytica that we were intending to broadcast the Chris Wylie interviews. So it's unclear, but I think if Nigel Oakes is right, then what's going to happen is the name SCL goes, the name Cambridge Analytica goes, and for some in the company, maybe they won't be too worried about that, so tainted is that brand. And in its place comes this big new big data company called Emerdata.
Well, now, what can you tell us about the Information Commissioner and her battle to get a warrant, even to enter Analytica?
Still going on. I understand there was a hearing yesterday in which Cambridge Analytica applied for an adjournment, and the judge said, OK, you can come back on Friday, and then he'll make a decision on whether that warrant is given. But you'll remember it was on Monday night on this programme that the Information Commissioner said she wanted a warrant to go into Cambridge Analytica. It's Thursday night now. They still haven't seen a single piece of data or document inside Cambridge Analytica. And if this is going to be a watershed moment in terms of how we reevaluate the relationship between big data companies and those regulators who are acting on our behalf, then the story of the information regulator, the Information Commissioner, and waiting for the warrant is a pretty good example of the current balance of power, you might say.
Andy Davis. Now I'm joined by the Conservative MP Damien Collins, Chair of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, who is in Folkestone. Damien Collins, this thing is running and running hard, and one wonders whether mere mortal MPs can keep pace with it, particularly your committee.
Well, we've been busy this week ourselves, but I think there was a good point made just now that it's incredible that it was on Monday night on your programme that the Information Commissioner said she was going to apply for a warrant. It's 4 days later and she still hasn't got that warrant, and that really shows why we've got to change the data protection bill currently going through Parliament to give her the legal power she needs to go in immediately and take documents and files and data that are relevant to her inquiry. You know, there have been photographs of crates of who knows what being taken out of the Cambridge Analytica offices, not by the ICO, and if that's impeding her investigation, then that is clearly wrong.
Have you been looking at Cambridge Analytica yourselves?
We have. So we've written to Cambridge Analytica today saying that just because Alexander Nix has been suspended from the company, it doesn't mean to say that our questions for them aren't still there. The question of misleading Parliament is a very serious matter. We look at the evidence he gave to us and look at what's happened over the last week and say, you cannot reconcile those two things. We asked him clearly about whether they'd acquired this data that we've all been talking about, and they said no, and therefore we want to get to the bottom of what happened. And I'm also concerned by what your report says as well, that we've seen that this is an organisation that has, in some ways, lots of different structures, companies being set up and taken down. It's not clear what the business structure is. But the idea that Alexander Nix could, through another company, just acquire all the assets of SCL and Cambridge Analytica, I think is, again, completely wrong. And I think our regulatory authorities should be looking very carefully at that.
Well, it is rather scary in a sense, because we have revealed some pretty odd stuff. And now Cambridge Analytica may cease to exist, and we're suddenly dealing with Emerdata. Had you ever heard of it?
Well, no, not at all. But that's why I think we have to look at whether these people are fit and proper to be directors of UK businesses. And actually, there may now be the time to have a proper investigation, looking in detail at the networks of businesses and bank accounts that these people are responsible for, because I think we need to follow the people and the money. That's the most important thing.
Well, some of the money you can't follow because it's coming out of the United States from one of the biggest Republican funders, a very secretive funder indeed.
Well, there are systems in place to track movements of money and also movements of data and contracts between companies as well. And I think the financial authorities can track money movements, and the information commissioners, both here and in the States, can track the movement of data as well. We've now got a series of investigations. The one my own committee is running, where we're looking to call back Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. There's the Information Commission's investigation, the Electoral Commission investigation, and separate investigations in the States. I think the ring is tightening on what is becoming a really important issue.
And if and when you do get Alexander Nix in front of you, what's your first question going to be?
Well, we want to ask him why he told us he didn't acquire this data from Alexander Kogan, which is what he told the committee. And I think we'd be interested in asking other questions about their relationship with SCL and other companies in their group. I was concerned what he said in your report on Monday and Tuesday about the way in which they seek to ghost in and ghost out of election campaigns, the way that they've repurposed consumer data to support political campaigns, and of course the broader ethics of the way they do business, which was so brilliantly exposed in your reports.
Damien Collins, Chair of Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee in the House of Commons. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Earlier I spoke to the Digital Culture and Media Secretary, Matt Hancock. I asked him why, 4 days after our investigation broke, just as Damien Collins said, the Information Commissioner simply hasn't been able to access Cambridge Analytica offices. She's yet to get a warrant. What kind of a system is it that equips the most important person when it comes to a digital crisis with no powers to go and get a warrant?
It's a system that needs strengthening, and the bill in front of the House of Commons right now, in fact they're debating it in committee as we speak, that bill will strengthen her powers.
But I mean, it is now 4 days since she first asked for a warrant. There's no barrister available for the other side today. But surely this is something where the government simply says, the Information Commissioner is going in.
Well, you have to follow the law as the government, and when you find a problem like this, what you do is you update the law.
Even when the law has been broken?
Well,
or may have been.
It may have been. So the investigations have to take place, of course, within the law. And the law, I thought previously that the law needed updating. So I brought a bill forwards, and it's in front of the Commons, and I hope that it gets into force by May.
So in future, the Information Commissioner will be able to move within 24 hours of a major issue crossing her desk.
She'll have much stronger enforcement powers, and indeed we're looking at whether they need to be strengthened further because of the experience of this particular investigation.
Now, can you be sure that the government has no contacts or no contracts in particular with Cambridge Analytica?
That's right. We've done an audit, and there are, as far as I know, there are no contracts with Cambridge Analytica or the parent companies with the government. There were contracts in the past, in 2008, 2009 and 2014, but not now.
What sort of thing were they doing?
Well, one was with the Ministry of Defence and one was with the Foreign Office, but we are confident that people's data is securely and properly being used by government.
And what about your own Conservative Party? Are you sure that they too have no outstanding contracts?
My understanding is that Cambridge Analytica approached the party and the party decided not to go with contracts with Cambridge Analytica. So they've never had, and they don't have now, any contracts with them.
The issue here that is so difficult is that this is a truly global crisis. This leakage of profiles in particular. I mean, that's worldwide, and that's Facebook, and you have virtually no power over Facebook.
I totally disagree. I totally disagree.
Little Britain has a chance of bringing Facebook to heel.
There's been this argument that's gone on for a couple of decades now that because the internet is global, therefore a national, one nation can't have a view over it. I think it is for the birds. I think it's completely wrong. You can put in place rules to make sure that for the UK and for UK citizens, data is looked after properly. In fact,
but if that's true, people would have done it already, and they haven't.
Well, they haven't, and we're doing it. But there's more than that. The European rules in this area, which we are putting in, which are part of what we're putting in place, are the first bit of European legislation I know of that's extraterritorial. They say wherever you are in the world, if you're dealing with European citizens' data, then you have to follow these rules, and that we're applying that in the UK too. So it'll work for the remaining months that we're in the UK, in the EU, and then it'll work like that
when we leave the EU too.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for talking with us.
Back now to our top story, the Facebook data scandal and the fallout from our undercover investigation into Cambridge Analytica. Sheila Jackson-Lee joins me now. She is a senior Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us. First of all, I know that you were scheduled to be meeting with Facebook. Has that happened?
Well, first of all, good evening, Kylie. Thank you so very much. No, as you may be aware, we've had a terrible northeasterner that caused our meetings to be rescheduled. But frankly, I am more interested in having the leaders of Facebook come before the Judiciary Committee in a hearing. I look forward to meeting with Facebook on some informal discussions. But I really think it would be important, and I think Mr. Zuckerberg made an important statement in the last 24 hours, which is that he would be open to that kind of presentation before the United States Congress, because there are too many questions that we need to ask and have answered. And I also think it's important to hear from Mr. Zuckerberg on the question of whether the industry needs to be regulated.
Did you hear his apology, if you like, or he stated a number of mistakes that he thought had been made at the time? Is that, do you think, significant in terms of giving reassurance to so many people who use Facebook?
I think the apology is a good door opener to fixing the problem. We know that the materials or the data that was harvested started by a researcher gathering information that then was harvested by Cambridge Analytica, obviously, I think, inappropriately, maybe illegally, and it violated the privacy of individuals who were kind enough to answer questions that were nebulous or were not going to be harmful, but it turned out to be harmful as the materials were then used in the 2016 election, as we now understand, because that company was ultimately hired by the Trump campaign. So I really think the apology is welcome, but I think it can be instructive and more instructive if we have Mr. Zuckerberg and his other executives with him in front of the House Judiciary Committee. I understand the Senate Judiciary Committee has requested the same appearance. Out of that, we can work together for a constructive fix, because no one can doubt that the 2016 election was impacted negatively by what happened. And I guess the other point is that this was known in 2015 about this data scattering, if you will, and none of these persons were notified. We need to fix that. There needs to be quick notification if your data has been skewed or scattered, and that it was not notified. The individuals were not notified. There was some attempt, I guess, to just fix it without notifying them. I think that's too much an intrusion into one's privacy for you not to be notified.
Okay, Sheila Jackson-Lee, Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. And the news that despite an apology from Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg, politicians from both sides of the Atlantic are calling for him to answer lots of questions about the data breach. Joining me now is Kurt Bardella, a columnist for USA Today and a former Breitbart media consultant. And Kurt, you actually met with Cambridge Analytica at the request of your boss at the time, Steve Bannon. What did you make of them?
Well, this was during a time where they were starting to get a lot of attention. They were on the Ted Cruz campaign, and kind of what type of data analytics were they really doing became a real topic of interest for the press. Mm-hmm. And so at Steve's request, I met with Alexander Nix and the Cambridge team. And after,
were you impressed?
I was very suspect of whether they could actually do the things that they were saying they were doing. And they were trying to, like anyone selling something, to distinguish themselves from their competition. But at the end of the day, I felt they were kind of overselling it a little bit.
That was your view. Steve Bannon's view of them, presumably something very different. I mean, he was a vice president of the company.
Well, and that's what really, one of the red flags for me was this dual role that Steve was playing, both running the Breitbart platform, but also running Cambridge Analytica. This is the first time that I realized he had these other responsibilities. And anytime you have someone that has a conflict of interest like that, I think that's a big red flag, and that's one of the reasons why I decided not to work with them.
Tell me about, Donald Trump has been tweeting today. Explain this to me. He's been tweeting today saying, hey, for all those people who criticised our digital operation, turns out we did a great job. So he's kind of bragging about his links, it would seem, to the Cambridge Analytica.
As always, he's kind of rewriting history. The criticisms of the Trump campaign was their lack of a ground operation, the lack of the manpower compared to most traditional presidential campaigns. In Trump's case, he relied almost exclusively on his TV exposure as well as the digital campaign that he was running that he's boasting about. It's ironic because most people that had anything to do with Cambridge Analytica, they're running the other way, trying to disassociate themselves from these people.
I mean, we know from Jared Kushner's people, for example, that they are now minimising the role played by CA, and certainly Brad Pascal, who ran the digital operation, says that he never really believed in psychographics, that actually they didn't really use them. But obviously that's a handy way to distance, I suppose, the Republicans from any idea that there would have been a link between that harvested data from Facebook and American voters who are being persuaded, or if you like, manipulated, to cast a vote in a particular way.
Well, I'm reminded of this saying, success has 1,000 fathers, failure is an orphan. Nobody had any issue with Cambridge taking credit for this election in the immediate aftermath of the election, but now that they're under fire, people are trying to run away from them.
And what about, I mean, there are lots of committee people over here on the Hill who want to meet Mark Zuckerberg, but they also definitely want to meet Cambridge Analytica, and presumably lots more questions about their involvement in the Trump campaign.
Oh, there's going to be here, I mean, we already know Mark Zuckerberg's been asked to testify before the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and you have to believe that Cambridge Analytica will be a part of those hearings going forward.
And Mark Zuckerberg, are you prepared to see him wandering down Pennsylvania Avenue in the next 24, 48 hours? Do you think that the Hill will actually be successful in pushing for this to happen?
We'll see how quickly they turn around the hearing. Certainly in the next couple of weeks, they're going to do this. We've reached a point where lawmakers want to hear from Facebook. They want to hear from the people who are at the decision-making process, like Mark Zuckerberg, possibly Sheryl Sandberg, and I think we're going to see a couple different appearances from Mark over time.
And lots of concern with these midterms coming up in just a few months. They want to be seen to be doing something about it.
Well, and also we want to ensure that our elections are protected. As Mark said the other day, we don't know that there's things not still going on attacking our election process, and we need to have the most safe, protected, and integrity-protected process possible heading into November.
Kurt Bardella, thank you so much for joining us.
I've been getting away with it all my